Welcome to Season 5 of the Lead with Coffee podcast, where we continue the journey into how you can change the culture in your business and your home through simple leadership practices. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready to join into today's conversation. Welcome back to Lead with Coffee, the launch of Season 5. I can't believe we're 80 episodes in.
We've had a lot to say over the last couple of years.
We sure have. 2 years, 80 episodes. Let's keep going.
Keep going strong.
So today we're going to talk about the draw of big business. When you're in small business, it can feel like this shiny, successful, big company over there that has everything figured out while you're over here struggling because maybe you don't have the technology or the funding to have all the best things and the best people, but you just keep trucking along in small business. And so today we want to dive into what it's like when you actually kind of crack the seal of big business when you're in small business and what our experiences have been.
Yeah, we do work with a ton of large businesses, whether that be a client or someone that we're partnering with, or we're a sub underneath, or we're just coordinating with on a project. So we have had a ton of experience over the last 20 years with a lot of big business. And there's one main thing that we've figured out with big business compared to small business.
And?
That is that we're still all humans.
It's very deep.
Very deep. And, maybe they have a lot of systems in place and have, again, a lot of funding, get these massive projects because they have the manpower to do it. But in the end, not all the systems are only as good as they are led, managed, and the people that are working them.
Definitely. I think it's, for many of us, we've worked in both. Some people really just have only done big business and they've never really done a small business, or like what we are is a micro business because you have 25 people or less. And so when you shift from big business to small business, there's a lot of things that you have to give up, but there's also a ton of perks because you typically get more flexibility and you can typically go on and have more growth opportunities in small business because you wear a lot of hats.
And you can make decisions a lot faster.
You can make decisions a lot faster.
A lot less red tape, a lot less layers to have to break through.
Yeah. So today we want to talk about, what it's like, because for us as a small business, it can often feel like we're competing against the big dogs. And we just want to glean some of their knowledge. We want to glean some of their and implement some of their systems. And so the reality is that the draw of big business can often leave us wondering, what the heck is going wrong inside that organization? Because what you have in your mind is you kind of have them up on a pedestal. But the reality is when you draw that curtain back a little bit, there's a lot of dysfunction. And so I love the quote that you all know, if the grass looks greener on the other side, water your own lawn. And we've been able to kind of breach in lately to very, very large corporations here in San Diego as we partner with them on different projects. And you're often left disappointed, but I think that's our own fault because we come in with expectations that are not realistic. Like you said, they're human, they have flaws. We just happen to feel like we run into all of them like in the first week.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have learned, and this has everything to do with the amount of time and effort we have put into leadership training and learning and wanting to communicate better, lead better, run a better business, is that when it comes to open, clear communication, we just don't see it as much as I guess we would like to and what we expect to. It's so normal for us that if we need to talk about something, to figure something out, then let's get the right people, and we've had a podcast about that, a seat at the table, get the right people with the seat at the table to have a conversation, to come up with some great solutions. Mm-hmm. And instead we see, and we've talked about this before, people holding their cards too close, and you just don't get the communication that you want, which therefore leads to delays, indecision, and frustration for a lot of the people. And I would say we have seen that more on bigger teams recently than maybe in the past.
Yeah, I think what also what you were just referring to were the layers of bureaucracy. The larger your org chart, the harder it is to actually get anything done. And we've seen that a lot on some of our projects that we're working on, where there's 8 or 9 superintendents on the project and everyone owns a zone. But if those superintendents aren't actually collaborating together, a company like ours that hits all those zones is being shifted all the time, because you're being told by one person that you're going to start over here, but that guy's not talking to that superintendent to realize there's no way you're starting over there. So you sometimes feel like a pinball trying to, find your way around. I know from the college district, I spent 15 years there, and the amount of layers that it took to get a decision made was hours and hours and hours, typically, even if it was an emergency decision, because of trying to get the right people in the right room, or even just someone that had the authority to actually make a decision, because there's a lot of titles, but not a lot of authority.
Well, and people might also have the authority to make the decisions, but they're afraid of all the backlash that they just push it off and off and off and off. And yeah, there was a lot of that, and there is a lot of that in the college districts, and it's unfortunate. And again, going back to the small businesses, there are pluses and minuses both ways. If I'm a project manager in a big business that has a big contract somewhere, I know I'm good for 5 years. As long as I'm performing pretty well, my projects are doing, on time, on budget, all those things for the most part, my job's pretty secure. In a small business, you're fighting tooth and nail every day to make sure not only are you giving your current projects the attention that they need and the detail and delivering excellence, all those things that we want to do, but you're also spending your time trying to figure out what the next project is. Where's our next opportunity? So there is a lot of give and take. The freedom is great for being small business and owning small business and being able to make decisions, but the security, although we're going on 36 years, we've done pretty well, but that's just not always the case. And and we've seen in the past, over this last 10 years, several of long time project managers or people from our organization that have jumped to the big business. And some of them, and they've admittedly are struggling.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point. It's kind of what we assume versus reality. And the reality is you have a lot of people that are comfortable. So they don't have this drive to go harder, to serve clients better. It's like, well, this is what we do, and I have, 4 more years to get it done. So I don't have any urgency or any reason to actually find ways to improve a process or to elevate a practice, because it's not my company. I think there's also that layer, we can dive into that in a minute, of actual ownership.
Yeah.
As a small business, you're typically a group of owners or an individual owner, and your passion is so different versus like, I work for someone and they're going to figure out how to keep me employed here, right? And I think that is part of that assumption versus reality. We're assuming that everyone that we come into contact with is on the same page, driving the same direction, but they actually have very different reasonings for why they're doing what they're doing. And like you said, we're pushing so hard because we have to keep a business going for our employees and our families, and there is no backup plan. This has to work. Where if you're just an employee at an organization, maybe you don't necessarily have that same drive to see it succeed any further than your own area, because you're not in charge of it and you don't feel like the impact is as high to you.
Yeah, and I would say the other layer of that for us personally, family-owned business, is we want to make this successful for the next generation. We have 2 of our sons that are interning and doing some work for us. And who knows, there's an opportunity for them in the future, if this is the business they want to be in, to continue the legacy forward and run it after we retire or whatever we do. And that pressure is real. You won't have that in big business where you're just you're an important piece, but you're just a piece that you're not trying to maintain a legacy in your job. In small business, and I don't even know what the percentages are. I'm assuming they're pretty high as far as family-owned small business compared to just partners in a small business. But there's a lot of legacy in there that you want it to be successful. You want it to be meaningful you want to show that you have the passion for it, so your kids even have an interest to be part of it. They're like, oh, they come home, worn out, exhausted, and, just frustrated every day. I'm not getting involved in that.
Yeah.
Or you coming home with a passion of, look what we got to do today, and look what we got to get involved in, and, this is what we're going to be able to do, or what we're doing. That's going to excite the next generation to want to get involved. And these are just pressures as a small business that you just don't have when you're part of a big organization.
Yeah. I think the other piece, like you said, it's a bigger group of humans. It's an interesting way to put it, but more people, more problems. There is that reality in there. And look, leaders are going to fail. And when you're working with an organization that you kind of have up on a pedestal, when they let you down, you're a little bit shocked. But at the end of the day, it's like they're just like you. They're working their way through problems. They're working on a project. They're trying to advance their organization or their department. And it's trial and error sometimes. Not everything is just set in stone. And that's how these large organizations are working, just like a small business. You have to adapt and pivot, and you're going to fail along the way. And I think that, like I said, that's part of our own expectation. Yeah. And we can get disappointed because we feel like, well, they're having the same problems we're having, but we came here to glean from them. But by the way, we're all in the same boat. You just may have 100 more people than we have, which is more stress.
Right, more stress. And the other thing that comes to mind, because we experience this too, is it's the same thing with a large church. Mm-hmm. Going and getting involved in a large church organization and getting really behind the scenes, working with leadership. It's like, oh, this is faith-based. This is a ministry. But again, they're all flawed humans, and we're all flawed humans, and there's mistakes, and there's, problems, human resources issues, all those things. And it doesn't matter what the organization is, because again, we are all human. We all make mistakes. And that's where the strong leadership comes in. That's so important. And how are you building up your teams, whether you're in a small organization or a large organization? And do you make sure, is it your priority to make sure that your teams feel like they're being listened to, like they have a growth plan, like they're not just a cog in the wheel? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good illustration. When it comes to faith-based organizations and nonprofits, you have to remember it's still a business. Yeah. And a lot of leaders inside of those forget that, or people on the outside looking in are like, oh, this is big mega church, it's going to be such an amazing experience. And what you forget, or what you may experience once you get in there, if you serve in any type of leadership role in a nonprofit or faith-based, is that, oh yeah, this is a business. While they serve people, it's also a business. It has to run. It's an organization. It has staff and employees and problems, right? And if you climb the leadership ladder enough, even as a volunteer, you're going to run into those leadership problems, and you're going to see everyone manages them different. And you may be looking at that pastor and thinking like, wow, I can't believe you're acting like this, but they're acting like a business leader and not like a pastor at that moment, and they might catch you off guard.
Right, absolutely. So, just to circle back, and we titled this one "The Lure of the Big Company," because it is that, and again, we had staff that have moved on to large companies thinking that they had more opportunities, and for some, absolutely they have, and for others, they are struggling, and they have, been very open and clear that they miss the type of culture that a small business brings, that you can walk in and have a conversation about your family, and there's trust. And I'm not saying this is with every small business, but we're using ours as an example, that there's complete trust in here, and there's open, clear communication. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate, because we do, trust me, I see projects that a lot of these larger companies are getting, and like, wow, I'd love to be part of that. But on the other hand, I almost have to, in retrospect, look back and be like, we have been part of a lot of those projects, whether it be at the airport or a college or
a stadium,
or some of these corporations, especially the ones that serve the military. Mm-hmm. We have seen some really cool things. We've been involved in some really cool projects. And so it's just like you have an older vehicle and the new version of your vehicle comes out and you're like, oh, I need to have that. And it's like, oh, by the way, that's got a bunch of recalls on it. So, be happy with what you have because it could perform just as well or even better than what you think you're going to get.
Yeah, I think our perspective is very unique, being a consultant that can go into local municipalities and educational institutions and large corporations. And we embed in with the C-suite. That's typically where we're working as we're working on projects with them. And so there is this, I think the biggest lesson that I've learned from working with all those groups is that they're waiting to glean from you as well. You're there for a reason, and you're bringing something to the table that's unique. And so stepping into your leadership calling, no matter whether you're the big business or the small business, if you're a leader in either of those, you should always be gleaning from other leaders.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've experienced the most, is that we'll go into these big organizations and they're so excited about some of the things that we've implemented on how you can serve better, how you can lead better. And that's always our goal. We want to come in and give you tools and resources so that way when we leave, you have something new to implement with your team years down the road, along with just your project being completed that you were hoping for. And we also do the same. We're learning a lot from these large corporations. It's not always easy to watch them fumble through their layers of bureaucracy when you can come back here to our office and we can go, all right, David, what decision do we want to make? Right? I think that's the beauty of it, but that's why we're in this business, because that's what we enjoy. We don't want to always answer to someone else. We want to be able to act swiftly, make changes, pivot and correct when necessary, or keep moving forward in the direction we're going because it's working well, rather than holding this, really large stakeholder meeting and doing, what are your thoughts, right?
Right, yeah, and just to go back to one of the things you were talking about as far as intimidation, because it's been two years now since I took over projects from one of our main clients that we've had for over 20 years. And I have done several projects for them on my own, but this role was to be the main taking place for someone who left our company to go to big business. Mm-hmm. And so I took over these projects knowing how much energy these take and how many layers there are. And so I was totally intimidated. I was confident in my abilities as a construction project manager and as a leader, but as far as their systems, it always seemed so overwhelming that I was a little concerned about taking this over and leading this company at the same time. And the funny thing is, and we've had this conversation several times, it took a couple months, but I realized that it's no different than anything else we were doing. I also realized that there were a lot of inefficiencies that we had going on, and it took the ability to just step into it and really understand what was going on around and not stop being as concerned as I was that this is going to be too much. Mm-hmm. It's way too intimidating for the amount of people that I have to coordinate with and the paperwork and all these things. It was a lot. Mm-hmm. But stepping into it and realizing that, you know what, I do have the skill set to be able to step in and take this thing over. So, I would say it's the same for any new large client we go into. You think that they have everything laid out and perfect, and that you better get your act together and make sure that you can answer all those questions. And when you get in there, you realize that you do already have a lot of answers to those questions from mm-hmm. the experience that you have. They might do it a little bit differently, or the way you do it might be what changes them mm-hmm. to make them a better company. So it's very interesting, and we've been blessed to have the opportunities to get involved in so many large corporations to really see the insides.
Yeah. I know from my experience, I always just say it's just more zeros. Yeah. It's either more zeros behind the number of staff you have, or it's more zeros behind the amount of money that you're managing and clients. And I know that when I took over the foundation at the college district, we were about a $5 million organization, and we turned it into a $30 million organization in a couple of years and hired a lot of staff. And the core team was starting to have that panic moment. And I would say to them, remember, the systems are all the same. it's just more zeros. And so don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. You know, that you're taking it $25 million more dollars, but your core systems are the same, and you can't get stuck on a number. And you have to just keep leading through it. And it's the same no matter whether you're a small business or large business, you know, or what you're doing. Can get scary when the numbers get big. The risk feels high, but there is that to think about too. You know, I want to talk about what it's like as a small business when your staff leave for big business, because you've mentioned it a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a good point in here. And I know that many of you listening may be thinking about changing jobs, and maybe you're going either from big to small or small to big. And what I would say to you is when you're leaving a big organization, most of the time there's backfill. There's groups of people that can help step in and take over your role. So the classic 2 weeks, you know, if you're in the highest leadership position, you know, my recommendation is never do a 2 week, a 3 to 4 week at a minimum. I know that you don't want to stay, you're ready to go, you kind of have a foot out the door. But at the same time, if you're in a high leadership position, even at a large organization, you have to watch your credibility when you do a 2 week. You know, that's never good. But when you're leaving a small business, it's so much more impactful when you're in a high leadership position, or even one that's just serving clients, you know, whether you're the owner or not. The hard part is there's no backfill for you typically. So then an owner has to step in and take over those roles, or the team's pivoting. And so when you do a 2 week in a small business, it's devastating to the organization if you're not prepared to pivot.
Right.
I think that's the beauty of where we've been, is that we've lost 2 people in the last 2 years who were critical functions to our organization. And you're shocked at first. You're a little bit angry because you feel like they're family and they're giving you a 2 week notice, and they may be running millions and millions of dollars of stuff for you. And it feels like disregard for the work and for everything you've invested in them as a small business. But at the same time, you understand their desire and how the big business doesn't care. They're like, we gave you the job, you're starting in 2 weeks. And I would say to you, you always have control of how you start and how you end. And think about that, because these are people who have invested a lot of time and money into you. And if you truly value the time that you spent for an organization, when you're leaving, you're going to give it just as much respect as when you came.
Yeah, no question. And I have such a good example of that. And this was a 3 week notice, and this was a retirement 3 week notice. So it's not like this project manager was leaving to another company. He and his wife decided, you know what, it's time. We're going to move out of state. And so we were given a 3 week notice, but he was a key player on a large project. And so back at the time, we had a lot of resumes. We'd already been kind of prepping ourselves for some new hires. So we had a ton of resumes that we had already reviewed and gone through, and we'd already talked to some people. And we're like, okay, you know, 3 weeks, it went by way too fast. Number one, it was not enough time. We needed to fill this position. We needed twice that to do it right. But what we did find, and this was a huge lesson learned, what we did find was someone who had all of the experience, all the projects that we were working on, very similar, high caliber project manager that knew how to get things done. And where we failed was the personality and the culture. And so we sent this person in to take these projects, and within a week they had offended the head of security to this organization, which obviously didn't go well. And so we had to scramble, and that was the end of her time with us.
You spent more time recruiting than you did with them as an employee. Yeah,
and that's a lesson learned, that you, even in something like that, you're better as the owner to jump in and try to take things over yourself and hire in the background instead of just hiring and putting someone out there that you just haven't truly vetted to make sure that they are the right fit for the organization. And due to that, we lost a couple of projects. That was still a client of ours for a while. But that was huge, and that was And whether he is retiring or moving on to another business, it has such a massive impact on small businesses. And so if you are out there and you are looking to make a change, just like Sarah said, it's important how you start and how you finish.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, I think that we just want to encourage you, whether you work for a small business or a large organization, to make sure you're thinking about your thinking and being mindful in what you're doing. And if the culture of small business is what you love, then, continue to dive into that. And if the feeling of a large corporation and safety and security is why you stay there, think about how you add value to others to leave your own legacy in a large organization, because you have the ability to do it in both. You don't have to be an owner to have legacy. It's how you treat people. It's the culture you create with those around you. And that's what people are going to remember. They're not going to remember what you did. They're going to remember how you made them feel.
We appreciate that you decided to hang out and spend some time with us discussing life and leadership. It would mean the world to us if you would share this episode on social media to increase our online presence. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a minute to rate it and review it wherever you listen. Mahalo!